Got several people on. We're going to start in a minute. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started with our session today. Our topic for today, we're going to introduce to you by just seeing what we know about Pesach Sheni. Today is Pesach Sheni, and the date of Pesach Sheni is exactly a month after the Korban Pesach was offered in the month of Nisan. I'm going to share the source for Pesach Sheni, which comes from the psukim in Parshas Beha'aloscha in Sefer Bamidbar. In showing, just gonna share a screen right now. And we see the psukim in front of us. So basically, this is in the 9th parak of Sefer Bamidbar. And we have the commandment first to celebrate Pesach. And we're told that in Pasuk Bet, in verse 2, that the Jewish people celebrated Pesach in its appointed time, which again, we know the Korban was offered on the 14th day of Nisan. And it was offered in the afternoon, and everything was done as it was supposed to be. And then after we're told, again in verses 4 and 5, Psukim Dalet and Hey, that everything was done according to the laws that were commanded to them while they were in Egypt, we're told in verse 6 in Pasuk Vav that there were people who were ritually unclean, who were Tameh Lenefesh Adam, what we call Tameh Meat, and they weren't able to bring the Korban Pesach. I think the screen is not sharing, sorry. Is the screen sharing now? It's not, right? Oh no. Okay, this worked when we did it before. Hold on one moment. Here we go. Does it work now? Confirmation if it works. This is showing the wrong thing, correct? Okay. This is not showing. Sorry for the technical difficulty here. Okay, I believe now it does. Am I right? Now we're good. Okay, so again, just to take you to where we are, we're in we're in Pasuk Vav, and we see here that people came forth to Moshe and said that they were tamei mates, that they were ritually impure, and therefore they were unable to sacrifice the Korban Pesach in the month of Nisan. And they approach, not sure, it isn't scrolling down. They, and it's not scrolling down, I apologize right now. I don't know if, okay. And they said that they wanted to offer Pesach at a later time. And Moshe doesn't know the answer to this question right away. One of the interesting occurrences where Moshe says, stay here and I will find out what Hashem is commanding you. And then at that point, he does get the commands from Hashem, who says that not only for that people are tamei mates, people who have come into contact with dead bodies, but also people who were b'derech rechoka. They were too far. They were not able to reach the courtyard in order to bring the Korban Pesach on the 14th of Nisan, are able to bring the Korban Pesach exactly a month later on the 14th day of the second month, which is the month of Iyar, which is, again, the Hebrew calendar today. And they bring it also with eating matzah and maror together. Nowadays, we do it with matzah. And again, the halachot, the laws of the Korban Pesach apply, but we're also told that somebody who does not meet these criteria and does not bring the Korban Pesach, even though they were not tamei mate, they were not impure, they weren't too far, they weren't able to, it wasn't that they weren't able to reach the courtyard in the proper time, they would not be allowed to bring the Korban Pesach. Just one thing I wanted to mention before we leave this screen that it took a long time to share to begin with. It's interesting that the people themselves, when speaking to Moshe, they come before him and say that why should we not be allowed? Lama nigara. They say that they really feel this exclusion from the korban, and they ask with a lot of seriousness, why are we not allowed to participate in this korban? Is there any way for us to do it? And as we know, they are given this opportunity. So that's the end of this screen, and I'm going to just switch to. I'm just going to make sure that this is on as well. And we're going to talk about a few different perspectives in dealing with what we're going to call FOMO, fear of missing out. These people who approach Moshe, these people who approached Moshe and wanted to offer the Korban Pesach. Okay, Noah, is the screen shared? Are you starting?
Yeah, I can get started now. Okay, good afternoon to all. It's a pleasure to share some Torah with you on this Pesach Sheni together with Rivka and Daniel. I will be building a bit off the introduction that Rivka provided for today. And I did bring a bit of a prop. I pulled off from our shelf a piece of matzah, which we should all be eating sometime today, a little crunch to remind us of the magic of Pesach Sheni. The angle that I'm going to be taking on Pesach Sheni is a linguistic and a legal one. And I want to try and connect the dots between two narratives in the Torah that use similar language and have similar structure. There is sort of a parallel an intertextuality, we could call it, between the story of Pesach Sheni, as Rivka beautifully outlined it, and another episode that we might be familiar with, that of Benot Tzlaf Chad. So I want to take us through the psukim and help us appreciate this intertextuality, and then we will try to make meaning of it and understand the significance of those connections. So as Rivka read for us just a moment ago, there is some language that is striking in the request of certain people during the time of the Pesach, of the first Korban Pesach that was brought from the time of Yetziat Mitzrayim, in requesting a second chance. So here in source number 1, hopefully you can see it in front of you. We just saw this a moment ago, but I want to try and zone in a bit on the language. So Vayomru ha'anashim. I'm trying to go along with the cursor here. Hopefully that helps. So Vayomru ha'anashim ha'hema. These people said, Elav, to him. So who are these people that said to him? This wasn't something that Rivka raised, but who are the identity of the people who asked for the second chance, who were Tamei Meit during the first Pesach, during Pesach Rishon, we could call it? There are a few possibilities in terms of the profile of these men, ha'anashim ha'hema. So one possibility is that these are the individuals that carried Atzmot Yosef, that transferred the bones of their ancestor Yosef, who made a special promise or pact with his descendants that they would escort his bones to Eretz Yisrael, that they would take them from Egypt and move them across the sea and through the desert until they made it to Eretz Yisrael. And so there were special people who were appointed with that task. And of course, by carrying those bones, they conducted Tumat Meit. So that's one option. Another option is that these were the individuals who had to deal with Nadav and Avihu when they passed tragically during the Chanukat HaMishkan. They were the people who pulled them out of the Kodesh HaKadoshim and had to deal with their burial. And then the third option is just people who were dealing with the death of a relative, a mate mitzvah that they had to partake in. So these were the people who were excluded or left behind when everyone was required to be ritually pure for the Pesach Sheni. So now that we appreciate a little bit about who these Anashim Hahema might be, let's see what their specific request is to Moshe. So they say, Anachnu tmeim lenefesh, we have conducted ritual impurity. Tmeim lenefesh adam, excuse me. Lama nigra levilti hikriv et korban Hashem b'moado betoch b'nei Yisrael. As we read a moment ago, they are asking, why should we be excluded? Why should we be marginalized? Why should we be forgotten or left behind without the ability to sacrifice this korban to Hashem on this appointed time among the Jewish people? This betoch b'nei Yisrael indicates what was at stake here. The ritual of the Korban Pesach was one that reinforced the collective national identity of the Jewish people, because it was really their first collective mitzvah that they received in Mitzrayim after setting up the calendar of HaChodesh HaZelachem. The first opportunity they had to do something difficult was in Pesach Rishon. And this was the very next year after Geulat Mitzrayim. And so this was their opportunity to do something that was part of the collective, to show that they were part of something larger, and they didn't want to miss out. These people who had done a mitzvah for carrying the bones of Yosef or Nadav and Avihu or participating in the Levayat HaMeit, they didn't want to miss out. And so they say, wait, what about us? Lama nigra, why should we be excluded? So I want you to put that to the side for a moment. And now I would like you to read with me. Let's see if I can figure out the scroll. Yep. The story of Benot Tzlaf Chad. We're going to take a bit of a briefer read of this one, and just appreciate that these were the daughters of this mysterious man, Salafchad. Lots of midrashim that connect the dots about who this man was, but he died in the desert. And as Moshe was preparing to give out the portions of land in Eretz Yisrael, they went according to the father, and the sons would inherit that lot. So what happened if a man only had daughters and then he passed away? Would he be left out and excluded from the lottery of land that would be given out? So that's the concern of the Benot Tzlofchad. So I'll just take you to the second pasuk here, where they use language that should be familiar to us. They say, Lama yigra shem avinu mitoch mishpachto. Why should our father's name be erased, eliminated from the annals of Jewish history just because he had daughters? That seems to be inequitable. It doesn't seem to be morally justifiable that if a person just has daughters at this juncture in history, that they wouldn't get any plot of land at all. And so this story, because of the language here, draws our curiosity, draws our attention in to think about the injustice that is compared to it, Pesach Sheni, this Lama Nigra and Lama Yigra. Why should we be excluded from this collective mitzvah of the Korban Pesach? And why should our father, and also why should we not have any portion in Eretz Yisrael? So far we have sort of appreciated on a linguistic level that these two narratives are connected. They are also connected on a structural level, because in both of them, Moshe does not know the answer. And Moshe has to consult with the ultimate power, with Hashem, to determine what the right course of action is. Because both of these scenarios fall outside the scope of the previously established legal precedent. For Korban Pesach, everyone was just supposed to be tahor somehow. They were supposed to be able to go to the mikvah, whatever it might be, but that didn't happen. And when it came to the Chalukah Ta'aretz, everyone was supposed to have a male descendant, but there was a situation that happened in which it didn't match the original category of the original intent of the law, which was that would apply equitably to all of the people. And so in both of these instances, there are individuals that step up and say, what about us? We matter, and we want to be part of this. And in both of these cases, Hashem says to Moshe, indeed, we don't want to exclude the individuals who are Tamei Meit. We don't want to exclude daughters of a man from having a portion. And so there is rectification by expanding the law, by adding a clause which is more inclusive and allows for more people to participate, to be part of Am Yisrael through the Korban Pesach, and to be part of Eretz Yisrael through the Chalukah Ta'aretz. So the Midrash connects these two stories by putting the protagonists on a pedestal, by saying that in most of the Torah, we just have Vayedaber Hashem Moshe Lemor. We know what Hashem dictated to Moshe, and Moshe records it. But there are a few situations in which there are stories, there are narratives that are shared that provide the context to the law. And they give credit to the protagonist of the story. And so Rashi cites the Midrash on both of these stories, and I'll read it for you inside so you can appreciate how this applies similarly to both of these episodes. On source number 3 here, V'ru'uya haita parsha zu, referring to the Korban Pesach or the Pesach Sheni. So it's appropriate for this have been said, lihi amer al yedei Moshe, that it should have just been said through Moshe, ka'asher kol haTorah kula, kishar haTorah kula, like the rest of the Torah. But ela shizachu Elu shetamar al yadehem. But now, for all of time, we associate the Korban Pesach with these men who participated in the mitzvah of Kvurat Hamet, whether it was for any of the characters mentioned above, Shemagalgalin Zechut al Yadei Zachai, because they did a great thing by making sure that they had a place within the law, that they had an opportunity to perform the mitzvah, and their stepping forward and stepping up should be rewarded by having them be remembered for all of time. And similarly with the Benot Tzlaf they are not nameless. It doesn't just record the law without giving credit to the characters that were responsible for expanding the law. The Sifra says here with the same language, Ri'uya hayta parshat nachalot shete'amer al yedei Moshe. This should have just been said generically through Moshe. Ela shezachu benot tzlaf chad shene'amra al yadeihen. But it was said through them, Lakach magalgalin zechut al yedei zakai. And for that, because it's meant to accrue merit to those who are already meritorious. So we've seen here that the common link, there are several common links between these two episodes, and the significance or the meaning of those links, I think, has to do with the midah of azut, or azos, as some of the Ba'alei Musar say, which translates as audacity, being bold and stepping forward with the right motivation, with the right reason. We know that people can be bold and bombastic for the wrong reasons. It can be about ego, it can be about anger, it can be about revenge. But here, both of these episodes, Pesach Sheni and Benot Tzlaf Chad, have characters that step forward and say, what about me? I'm being forgotten. But they do it because they want the opportunity to be part of the great master story of Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. And so I'll wrap up here by saying that sometimes when we're missing out on something, the FOMO, the fear of missing out, sometimes we do have to relegate to not being able to partake in everything. There are times in life where we're just disappointed by the way that reality turns out. There's disruption that we can't control. But there are other opportunities in which we are invited, or maybe not invited, but we are able to take a leap and to stand up and say, what about me? How come I am being excluded? How come we aren't part of this mitzvah? And Pesach Sheni is good precedent for that attitude and for that activism. And by comparing it to Benot Tzlaf Chad, I think we see two fantastic examples of what I would call halachic activism, of taking responsibility when things aren't turning out in a way that includes you, but you step in and are able to make more space for yourself. And so sometimes dealing with a fear of missing out means taking a risk and putting yourself out there to ask to be included. So that's my piece on Pesach Sheni. And I think we're going to turn things over now back to Rivka and to Daniel.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed some of those important lessons about halachic activism, taking risks, changing the halachic process, the human intervention. We're going to shift to another aspect of FOMO, and I'm going to start with a little bit of the same place that Rabbi Noah started, in that he talked about the identity of the people who came before Moshe. We have to ask a question. If we think about it for a moment, the whole concept that they were asking for, we know that they were impure. We know that there was a legitimate reason possibly why they were impure, but still, think about other scenarios that come up in Jewish life where redos weren't asked for. For example, let's say somebody converts in the month of Cheshvan. They missed all the holidays in Tishrei. And once they convert, they say, you know what? I really missed out on hearing the shofar. Is there a way that I could fulfill the mitzvah of shofar a month later, in the month of Cheshvan, for example? And we know, of course, that, or most of us probably know, there's no story about that in the Torah, and that didn't happen. So we kind of have this interesting phenomenon here, specifically with Pesach, where we could ask why the redo was asked for in this case, and even more importantly, why the redo was granted to them. So hopefully it's gonna be a little smoother now in terms of sharing some sources here than it was last time. And I'm just going to put my sources on the board, and we'll look at a few different sources dealing with what I called a biblical case of FOMO. So here we go. And what we're going to kind of look at is some reasons why maybe these men, and again, Rabbi Noah mentions that the Midrash identifies two possibilities for why these specific people were impure, is either they were the ones carrying the bones of Yosef, that he had commanded them when they were still in Mitzrayim before he died, or alternatively, the story, the Chanukhat HaMishkan, the opening of the Mishkan was in the month of Nisan, and we know that Nadav and Avihu tragically die at that moment. And here Pesach was just a little bit after that. So his two younger brothers would be impure still at that time and unable to offer the Korban Pesach in the month of Nisan, and therefore reached out for this opportunity in the month of Iyar. So they were very legitimate reasons, and I want to focus on what these men again were maybe thinking, and why again they thought this was an unprecedented situation. So the Khatam Sofer says something interesting. He notes that this Pesach, the Pesach in the desert, which was now in the Shana Shniya, this is the second year since the years were counted from the month of Nisan. So this is another Nisan now that they were approaching, and we're still pre the 40-year decree in the desert, which means that the Jews were on their way into Eretz Yisrael. They were going to make an important stop, they had made an important stop at Matan Torah. Now they were traveling and were going to enter into Eretz Yisrael. We know a few prakim later in the book of Bamidbar, they sent spies, which was supposed to be right before they go in. So what did these men realize? They said, we're only going to have one Pesach in the desert. We had the Pesach when we left Mitzrayim, but that Pesach we know was all about the historical moment and was very much part and parcel of the miraculous events of leaving Egypt. But now, things could have been different. They're in the Midbar, and the Khatam Sofer points out, they're in Eretz Lo Zruah. They're in the wilderness. And it wasn't a given that the Jews were going to be happy celebrating the fact that they left Egypt. And we even know from studying some of the Prakim in Bamidbar that was the case in some instances. There were some complaints. And here they were in Nisan a year later, and according to the Khatam Sofer, we see that they were happy. Some chuba. There was this element of happiness, and they made Pesach. They brought this korban to thank Hashem for the miracles of leaving Egypt, and they recognized that in the next year they were going to be in Israel, and that's why they said those two words that we keep talking about, Lama Nigara. Why should we be held back? Why should we miss out on this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to celebrate Pesach in the Midbar before entering into our next point of settlement in Eretz Yisrael? So that could be one reason why, again, they felt that they noticed, they understood that it was a moment in time that wouldn't be able to be replicated, and they wanted to partake in. The Meshech Chachma points out something interesting, again, tied into the identity of these people, especially if we focus on the fact that maybe these people were involved in burying the bones of Yosef. It wasn't just any bones that we're talking about here, but we know that the story of Mitzrayim, starting from when the Jews entered Mitzrayim, and settled there originally, and up until the point that when Yosef dies, he foretells them of the fact that they're going to be in exile in Egypt, but that there's going to be an end to that exile as well, that Hashem is going to remember you. And the Meshech Chachma quotes this pasuk from Bereshit when Yosef made the people, his brothers and families, promise that they would take out his bones, because Hashem will surely pakod yifkod etzchem. Hashem surely is going to remember you. There is going to be an end to your time in Egypt. And when he does, I want to be taken out with you. I want to be a part as well of that redemption. So Yosef was the one who started the seeds of the Geula. And so here it's his bones that were caused these people to become tameh and made them exclude them in a sense from being able to celebrate this Pesach. So here they are turning to Moshe and saying, okay, like think of these bones that made us Tameh and what they represent. Think of that message of Yosef. And we feel so connected to it. We really get it. We understand that Yosef is so intrinsically connected to the Pesach story. And therefore we feel like this is really an exception. That what happens, we know, as Rabbi Noah mentioned, one of the possibilities is that it was random people who maybe were Tameh mates, who were impure from their relatives. That we understand. But here in this situation, the particular bones that made us Tameh are ones that are so much a part of the story. And that's why they turn and make this, they make this request from Moshe. So again, in both of the cases, whether from the Meshech Chachma or scrolling back up for a moment to the Khatam Sofer, we could see two different angles maybe for how the people that approached Moshe were very thoughtful. They really understood the meaning behind the celebration of Pesach and offering the Korban Pesach. It wasn't just an external type act or ritual that maybe didn't have so much meaning to them, but they got it. They understood the meaning, and they really, and therefore really had a serious case of FOMO in the month of Nisan. And the Malbim and others as well, although I just brought in the Malbim, talk about the righteousness of these men. And how, as Rabbi Noah mentioned before as well, that the zechut, the merit of this parsha being transmitted to the Jewish people came about through them. It's not the same as most mitzvot and Torah that are told to us just through Moshe. Moshe got many different questions asked to him, many different halachic requests or considerations obviously came his way, but they're not necessarily recorded through the names of the people who mention them. But in this case, we see this particular situation is communicated to us through people coming to Moshe and the halacha being transmitted through their zechut and through this merit, as the Malbim says, that these were anashim who were miyuchadim. They were special people, unique people, ksherim, right? Super scrupulous about mitzvot, charedim al ha-mitzvot. These were uniquely righteous people who really wanted to observe mitzvot in the proper way, with the proper understanding. They really got it, and they wanted to be included. And I just want to end off with one idea that I thought really connected well to the Pesach story, because this whole idea of being connected to the community is something that comes up in the Seder as well in a different form. When we talk about the different sons that we tell this Pesach story over to. And one of the sons, the Rasha, asks about the avodah, about the service in the mikdash, about the Korban Pesach. But we know that we come down hard on him because he excludes himself, right? Hotzi atzmo min haklal. He didn't necessarily want to be a part of that. And here we see that we can now balance that out with the righteousness of certain people in the generation of leaving Mitzrayim that wanted to be a part of it, that went out of their way to be a part of the Korban Pesach. And I guess I'll end and ask all of you, would you have been one of those people if you had had a legitimate reason, as I put at the top, right? There was a reason why that they were involved in something. There was a reason why they weren't able to, yet they still pushed ahead and wanted to be a part of it. And in our lives, we have so many of those opportunities. And whether, again, we were in the desert or whether in our lives now, would we be those people, or are we those people who ask for those opportunities, even when we had an excuse, or we had a scenario, or we had a reason or an angle to not make us have to, and we were able to be satisfied with our status quo. So just some thoughts to think about in terms of, again, the people who approached Moshe and where they were coming from and why they were granted this request of a redo of Pesach Sheni. I'm now going to pass over the microphone of sorts to our next sheet.
Okay, so let's look at Pesach Sheni from a little bit of a different vantage point. I want to talk about second chances. In some ways, you think about Pesach Sheni, it's almost sort of the paradigm of second chances. Is there something the Torah is teaching us, right? Are we learning from here about second chances, that we do get second chances? So let me throw out a few examples. Case study number one. Rivka is a good student. She's in 10th grade. She does really well on tests on a regular basis. But one day she takes a test and she really fails. It's a disaster, right? She approaches her teacher after class and says, look, this was an exception. I really did poorly. Can I just retake this test? So it's up to the teacher to decide. Some teachers might say yes. Some teachers might say no. They might say yes because, after all, I just want you to know the material. They may say yes because you have a record, right? And your record is very positive. I know that this is sort of an outlier, that I'll let you do it again. All possibilities. That's case study number one. Let me throw out another example. Let's say you have a situation where Ruvain is, one of the star players on a sports team. There's a game this Sunday, and he's very excited about it. He's ready to leave, and he realizes that his parents are not in the house, and his younger sister, who is 3 years old, is still in the house. Now he's stuck. What do I do? Like, can I leave? I can't leave. I can't leave the 3-year-old at home. Doesn't know what to do, but he's stuck. Can't get in touch with anybody, so he stays, and he misses most of the game, and his team loses. He feels terrible, right? He knows that had he been there, things could have been different. So he goes to all the players. He says, you know what? Can I have a second chance? Right? Obviously, it's very unlikely he's going to get a second chance. The game happened, right? It's not just him. There are many, many players involved. He's not going to get that second chance. In those two cases, in the case studies, right? In the second case, I would argue that he had even more of a sort of reason behind what he was saying than in the first case. Yet the reality is we don't always get second chances, and he has a second chance here as well. That's his reality. Thinking about those two case studies, let's go back to our psukim, right? So go the same pasuk that we've been focusing on. Vayomer ha'anashim ha'hei love, right? So the people who want a second chance, essentially, they go to Moshe and Aaron, and they say, we want a second chance, right? Why don't we get a second chance? So many Rishonim ask a very simple question. They say, what do you mean? Like, what are you asking? You want a second chance, but in the pasuk itself, you're saying why you don't get a second chance. These are the rules, right? You are tamei lenefesh adam. You know the rules. Why would you think that the rules don't apply to you? Why should you get a second chance? That's the question they ask. So there are many different answers to this question. The Sforno addresses this issue somewhat. And he says the following. He said, we saw the ritual impurity we have incurred was incurred in the process of fulfilling a positive command. Why should the result of this be the misdemeanor of not fulfilling such an important commandment as observing the Pesach at the appointed time? What's Sforno saying? What was their logic? Their logic was, we did the right thing, right? If we did the right thing, why shouldn't it be that we should be able to, not lose out? That's what they're asking. Now, what's interesting is Moshe didn't know the answer at first, right? Moshe was not sure, because after all, the rules are the rules. So he wasn't sure exactly what to do. So I want to take you to a Gemara in Sukkah, which I think maybe is very instructive and gives us something to think about in terms of this whole story. We've mentioned in the previous presentations the different opinions over who they were mitame to, right? There are actually 3 different opinions over what the exact scenario was. The specifics of it don't matter for us at this point in time. It's clear that they had become ritually impure by coming in contact with somebody. But what's interesting is, at this point in time, the Gemara tries to learn, this is Gemara in Sukkah, tries to learn a famous halachic principle based on this story. What is that principle? Ha'osek b'mitzvah patur min mitzvah. If you are involved in a mitzvah, you are exempt from that mitzvah. Many discussions about what the exact parameters of that specific are. But I think if you think about that concept in the context of this story, it's very interesting because basically the people who became tamei are arguing exactly the opposite, right? They're saying, no, we did a mitzvah, right? Burial of the dead is a very important mitzvah. But we don't want to lose out, right? We want to be able to continue to do the next mitzvah as well, right? We want to do both. So essentially, they're trying to reject osek b'mitzvah patur min mitzvah and say, no, we should have to do both because they're both important. Just because we did something wrong, why should we now? Just because we did something right, why should we now lose out? That's their argument. So there are a number of different ways to understand what the Gemara is saying here, right? One possibility is to say that Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni are not the same, right? Maybe there are no second chances. Maybe, they did lose out. If you look at the nature of their question was, why should we lose out from doing the carbon Pesach at the same time as everybody else? And the answer is, I'm sorry, you can't. You'll have to do Pesach Sheni, right? That's sort of like the runner-up. and you do lose out. That's one possibility. And then Hosek b'mitzvah patur min mitzvah still applies. The other possibility is maybe the Gemara is learning it from the question. When they said their assumption that they should not be able to lose out, right? What was that all about, right? They thought that wasn't true, and they're told afterwards, no, it is true. But either way, Hosek b'mitzvah patur min mitzvah means that sometimes there are no second chances, right? In these cases that we mentioned, the case studies we started with, sometimes you make a decision and it's the right decision, and there are repercussions. It happens all the time in life. I think that's a very important message, right? We live in a world where we think that we should be able to get everything all the time, but that's not always the case. Sometimes we do the right thing, and whatever the repercussions are, we live with those repercussions. John F. Kennedy wrote a book that I recommend to all my students. In 1956, he had been a senator before he was president. He wrote a book called Profiles in Courage. Profiles in Courage is basically a book about a number of different senators that made courageous decisions. And he describes one chapter for each of those decisions that was made, gives you some background. And the common theme was they made decisions that maybe weren't popular, that at times maybe even destroyed their career. But still, they were courageous, and at the time, it was the right thing to do, right? So sometimes courage means doing the right thing, even if you will mean not having a second chance. That's really what Hosek b'mitzvah patur min mitzvah means, right? You're doing the right thing, even though there may be some repercussions afterwards. I just want to read you a few lines from his work. He says, in whatever arena of life one may meet the challenge of courage, whatever may be the sacrifices he faces if he follows his conscience, the loss of his friends, his fortune, his contentment, even the esteem of his fellow men, each man must decide for himself the course he will follow. The stories of past courage can define that ingredient. They can teach, they can offer hope, they can provide inspiration, but they cannot supply courage itself. For this, each man must look into his own soul. And I think the message is, despite the fact that, we always want it to work out this way, sometimes we don't get second chances. It's interesting that Pesach Sheni is really the exception to the rule. The fact that Pesach Sheni exists, right? You miss Pesach Rishon and you could do Pesach Sheni. There are very few cases where that's the case. Usually, you miss a mitzvah, you often can't make it up. It is what it is, but you move on. And if you did it for the right reason, because you're involved in another mitzvah, that's a legitimate halachic principle, and you move on with life knowing that you did the right thing. I think it's a very important message in today's society where people want to have it all, and the answer is sometimes you can't, but if you're doing the right thing, then that's the Torah's perspective on what you should be doing.
Okay, great. So we got a little bit of JFK thrown in there as well to round out our discussion today on Pesach Sheni. So I just wanted to tie everything together that we've seen today. So after our little bit of an intro to Pesach Sheni, we looked at a few different angles for what was really going on. So whether it is the legitimacy of maybe why there was this redo of Pesach Sheni given, whether as Rabbi Noah spoke about the halachic activism involved, the opportunity, whether for Pesach Sheni and also later on in terms of the inheritance given to women, the B'not Tzlaf. So we saw the incredible merits and the incredible progress or the change that was able to come about by people who took a stand in a situation that many people may have been complacent about. Picking up on that, I kind of continued with that theme a little bit in talking about, again, different understandings and justifications and reasons why these people in particular wanted to have a part in Pesach Sheni when Pesach Rishon didn't work out. And as my husband mentioned, we don't often get that chance. And very often it's okay if we don't get that chance. And he really picked up on that and talked about that fact of life where sometimes we are faced with competing values and we are not able necessarily to accomplish both, but the courage that he spoke about and the being able to, even though we may have the FOMO, knowing that we made the right decision and what was the right decision at that time, especially. So all those together, hopefully, as we spend the next few hours, maybe munching over our matzah and thinking at the same time, we can hopefully walk away today with a few more ideas on Pesach Sheni in the few hours that remain. And I think that's the end of what we had formally to share with you. And if there are any questions or any comments, anything that we can turn the camera, we can turn out the screens or the cameras to you, to any of you who may have something that you want to share.
I also just wanted to thank Rivka and Rabbi Daniel for sharing the panel here, and just apologize that my wife Sarah was hoping to teach here, but as was a theme in our teaching, sometimes unexpected things happen, and sometimes there are second chances, sometimes there aren't. So my wife got a little bit sick and isn't able to teach right now, but hopefully you will have another opportunity to learn with her another time, as she teaches often, and we'll teach this for this forum in years to come. But thank you everyone for joining, and Pesach Sheni Sameach to all.
All right.